technology. I'll never understand it.
It
I'll
is what it
never
is.
like it, but I'll play in it. All right, Sunday, tell us how Safe Harbor Financial is doing, and is it all doom and gloom out there in the cannabis industry? That's all we hear about now.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Good.
We deal with a lot of companies, and there's a lot of new companies getting new licenses, and I see a lot of thriving markets out there. I think what we're seeing is competitive forces that are forcing somewhat natural correction in the market. I mean, even if you take Colorado as an example, people used to fly to Colorado to buy all their cannabis and take their vacations, and now they're not doing it. So you're seeing just a natural correction as these other states actually legalize. There's not a need to come all the way to Colorado to do it anymore. So I think the other thing is the new entrants coming into the market have bigger advantages than those who pioneered prior to, and they have the advantage of a lot of knowledge out there, a lot of talented people. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I think those fast followers that we're seeing in the other states, they just have a lot more resources available to them to succeed.
There you go. Brooke, I know you have questions for both of these people, so I'm going to allow you to take over.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to start with Sunday, and then this one will also go to Jamie as well. What inspired you to be in the banking part of cannabis? It can be such a frustration point when individuals or companies go into this space. Usually they'll go down to their family bank. That's what I did to get my account open, and they said, yeah, we can do it. And then all of a sudden, as it went up to the higher chains of command and they figured out, they had a discussion, they said, no, we can't touch you with like a 10-foot pole. So what inspired you to go into the banking aspect of cannabis for cannabis businesses?
Well, I think you remember that I was going to retirement in 2014.
Yeah.
And then suddenly this just landed on my plate, and the board was concerned I was going to start the project and leave. And I really said it's only going to be a 5-year project. We'll talk about a 5-year contract, but that really changed. But it really boiled down to one thing. Somebody had to do it. They had to do it right. And it was the right thing to do. Leaving an industry out there that was legalized, didn't have access to banking. There was nobody in my research that didn't want this money to be accountable and reported correctly. So it was the right thing to do. Even if there was the fear of prosecution, it's still, based upon everything I heard, it was a risk that I thought was a calculated risk worth taking. But I think the driving force was, the safety factor in the community, and it was the right thing to do to protect, Colorado and the businesses.
I love that. And we appreciate that so much, because you're right. There is the safety aspect. And if you didn't do it, we needed, you led the way in your leadership of doing that. And thank you for not retiring and staying on board so that these companies could have banking, because it's such a pain point. My question for Jamie is, you've had a lot of experience with, I think you said this is your third business that you have opened in the cannabis space. What inspired you to open this third entity? How is it going? And what's been your favorite highlight so far of going and having this New Holland group that you've created?
One of the things I loved about working at Bhang was, taking the brand across state lines and across borders. In the industry where you're still in prohibition and you can't, I can't just manufacture chocolate in one place and then ship it across state lines. I had to have essentially 50 different relationships and a relationship in each country. What I realized was the work that I did in investing in real estate was really beneficial in bringing a lot of those, creating the relationships and finding the commonalities in the rules so that we could have efficiencies across all of those differences. And what I realized after doing that for 7 years is that there are a lot of people out there that have had their head down, have been focused on, rightly so, whatever it was that they were working on, and then realized, okay, well, now I'm ready for expansion. And they're at the beginning of that process, and I could actually make it easier for them sort of help them leapfrog that learning curve. And in a former life, before I was a real estate investor, I was a middle school teacher. I have a master's degree in education and, did a lot of curriculum design work, and was a college professor at the University of Oregon. So teaching's in my blood. And I was just fortunate enough to be in a position where I could pick and choose what I wanted to do, and helping people has always been, near and dear to my heart. It's what makes me tick, so to speak. So starting a consultancy and using my hard-won knowledge and experience to help others was really just a natural fit.
You mentioned you're related somehow to Cypress Hill. Did I hear a cousin or something?
Yeah, DJ Muggs from Cypress Hill is my first cousin. Yeah.
Okay, so he was in Boston for NECAN, as was your other friend, Jim Belushi.
Yep.
And just one. I did not go to Cypress Hill, but I did hang out with Jim for a little while. I didn't get a private moment with him, but you know what? That was okay too. I will tell you, I did have fun when I walked into the room that he was in, and we were live streaming the interview that we had done with him back in 2022. And I said, look who's on my network right now, so it was kind of fun to do that.
Yeah.
I do want to ask a question here about access to capital, okay? Because I think really and truly that is one of the most important things for any startup in pretty much any industry, but in cannabis, it's extra hard. And, as I started off saying, it's doom and gloom Sunday to you. I was just kind of prompting it because I follow the news and I see what's going on. I don't understand it, but I follow it. Okay. So Sunday, explain to me how challenging it is as a female to have access to to the man who has all that capital. And how do you break down that ceiling, or however that how do you do that?
Well, that's a real good question. I think first and foremost, I think that, investment banking and access to capital is still a man's world. I just finished 42 investor meetings over 4 days in 4 different cities, and there were only 3 meetings in which women were attending and were decision makers. So I think the first thing we want to do is see more women who take an interest in other women who are getting into business. But the primary thing is, if you've got a good business model, if you present it correctly, if you really fine tune your story and you meet projections and you show them that you're going to succeed and their money is going to be well placed, that's the first thing you have to do going in there. But I think I haven't run into a lot of problems at this point in time in terms of getting people to buy into the story. And I think that's fortunate for Safe Harbor Financial, simply because we're indirectly working with the cannabis industry, and financial services is one of those staples that every business is always going to need. So I think, again, it boils down to business model, but it would be really great to see more women in the investment world.
Yeah. And Jamie, I mean, back in Cannabis 1.0, when you started Bhang, there were women. There was over 20% of women that were in the industry. And now that has dwindled down. Is it because of what Sunday just described, is the boardrooms are still filled with men?
Well, first I want to clarify, I didn't start Bhang. It was 5 years old when I went to work there. So, you don't want to take credit for something I didn't do. There were a lot more women when I first started. And, there's a whole bunch of societal elements that are coming into play right now. I think, I'm just not a big believer that there's some nefarious, conspiracy to exclude women. I do believe that we know that, less than 1 cent out of every dollar of investment funds is going towards women or people of color who are starting companies. And I think part of that, and I've said this before out on the speaking circuit, is that we generally defer to the people that we're comfortable with, to our own sort of sphere of influence, if you will. And so if the power and money and influence rests with white men, they're not rubbing their hands together going, yay, we're going to exclude everybody, but they are going to hear the deals across their desk from the people they golf with and the people they're on the board with. And it always continues to be this who looks like me, sounds like me, talked like me, went to my college. You know, here's my son. He's a great kid. You should give him an internship. And it just becomes kind of an insular situation. And the only way we can really break out of that is with intentionality. And so if you take it to an extreme, you're asking the master to dismantle his own house. But if you really, you know, I generally believe that most people are good. And I think that they just have to be thinking about that. And I always say when I'm investing, I know that women and people of color have to work harder, have to be smarter, have to be prepared to get as far as their white male counterparts. And I'm not a man hater at all. I just know that I cannot show up late. I cannot show up unprepared because I'm going to be held to a higher standard. I'm aware of that. And so I know that other people are as well, which leads me to believe that when someone that's a female or a person of color has made it to a certain point, they're probably really smart and prepared and detail oriented and have all the right stuff. And they're probably going to make a really great investment for me and my dollars. So I try with intentionality as an accredited investor to place my capital in those arenas. So I've made investments in Garden Society, women-owned, women-founded companies, Sava, women-owned, women-founded, queer-owned company. I'm doing that intentionally with my dollar, both just out of a social justice passion, but also because I find these people to be awesome operators. And so anyway, I just think that the way that we can get there is through being intentional about what we do.
I agree 100% with that. Brooke, do you want to add in something here?
Yeah, I love that Jamie touched on that because it would be lovely if more, I think, companies approached with that kind of outlook and they looked at the women-owned companies and the minority-owned companies and say, like, I know they're going to work harder. And so that's always something that I encourage males that come to our events, like, spend some money, invest in these women-owned businesses. If you hear a company that you really like, go and put your money there for them because they need the help, and we can't do it unless we all come together as a team. So what's been, I think, for both of you guys being in these industries that are obviously very male dominant, and especially with banking, I would say is extremely male dominant, what's been the most highlighted positive inspirational thing that you have come across in being in these spaces, and what has been like maybe the best compliment a male counterpart has given you in being in the roles that you guys are each in your businesses?
Would you like me to go first?
Yes, I'll have Sunday go first. Yes.
You know, first of all, I'm really going to have to rack my brain on some compliment. That doesn't happen a lot. But, you know, I have to agree that, you know, I'm not a man hater either. And as many times as I can remember the wrong thing being said to me, I can also remember the male influences I did have in my career. Very early in my career, I had a gentleman that I worked for at a credit union, and he started talking to me about the Peter Principle. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've just never heard about that before. And then I'm like, how do you know you're getting there, right? And then we kind of dissected that. And I said, oh, gee, you ever had that feeling about me? He looked right at me. And this was so impacting. I still remember. And I was only 23 years old, long time ago. And he said, I don't think you're ever going to hit your Peter Principle. You know, so there were, as, you know, good influences as the ones who looked right at me and said, well, that's why I hire women. They work harder. You know, but that's what they keep them. And I have to agree that mentoring and grooming, you know, we're now in that place where it matters. Standards have changed in the workplace. You cannot minimize women or people of color at this point in time. That standard has changed, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that mentoring and grooming and moving up through the organization just because the standards of the workplace have changed in the last 5 years.
And you know what, kudos
So
to men.
I think I want to add to that, though. I think that I try to be careful with the concept of grooming and mentoring, because one of the things I've realized is as I've gotten deep into the industry at a high level is that what a lot of women and people of color need isn't grooming or mentoring. It's just access to money. You know, and it's almost, I would say, offensive to some of them, like, oh, well, let me mentor you. And a great example comes to mind. I got introduced to a woman at a fundraising event, and the person that introduced us was like, oh, Jamie, you've been so successful. I think you'd be a great mentor for this woman. And she was very kind and gracious, and we met and it was wonderful. And then come to find out, she was the head of real estate for Home Depot and had, I mean, she had hold giant jobs, could run circles around me, definitely didn't need me to mentor her. She just needed money and kept running into these roadblocks. And you know, so then what my role was not to, you know, pat her on the head and not, Sunday, that's not what I'm saying you're saying, but you know, I didn't want to be like, oh, here's what you need to be doing and mentoring, or it was just simply a matter of opening up my Rolodex and saying, this woman's amazing. Her business plan is amazing. This is a no-brainer. And you know, if you aren't thinking about investing in this woman, you need to ask yourself why. Do you have a hidden bias? And sort of putting people a little bit on the spot for them to question whether or not they have that hidden bias, because there would be no reason for her not to be able to raise capital. Her plan is, all of it makes sense. Secured by real estate, there really just wasn't a reason for her not to be able to raise capital, but she's really struggling. And then that's when you kind of face those institutional biases and personal biases. And that's when our job, rather than sort of mentoring and grooming, but sort of advocating, comes into play.
You know, can I just tag on? So I think it's the difference in perspective that we're talking about here. So I had to recently, for NASDAQ, determine how many women were in my organization. So I went all the way through it, people of color, people, women, you had to give them the statistics. And 47% of my workforce is women. 47% of my management team is women. So when I'm talking about mentoring and grooming, I'm talking about bringing them up through the ranks in the workplace and giving
Beautiful.
them that opportunity,
Yeah,
more so
beautiful.
than and access to capital.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
There you go. Brooke, do you have something to add here? Because
I will say, I love mentorship. I have mentored people. I've been asked to do some consulting for the cannabis side, but I've also been mentored by some very amazing, strong men. And I feel very fortunate with that too, because I've always kind of sought out mentorship from both males and females to get me where I need to go. I've always kept older, wiser people in my life for that reason. And I even had a friend say to me, like, you have a lot of older people in your life. And I said, yes, they've lived, they've experienced some stuff. And I don't want to necessarily make some of those same mistakes. And I love getting mentored. I will say the access to capital has been a pressure point. One of my main people is a male that has supported my business for the past 3 years. And I feel so honored that he lets me go and do my thing. And then I get to share with him what I've done. And then if I feel like I'm stuck somewhere and I'm like, this isn't working, what should I try? He'll give me ideas, but he's like, you go shine, you go do you. But it's been, I feel I've gotten a very shared, blessed model when it comes to that.
I get that UBU thing from my life partner a lot. I just want to say, okay, because I think she's given up. No, only kidding. Guys, this has been great. I want to throw one thing out at you, and we're up against it. So I'm just going to wrap this up. But there's a book out there that changed my perspective on gender. And I've talked about it on my show before, and maybe I've mentioned it to Jamie, but the book is called The Macho Paradox, and it's by a guy named Jackson Katz, who I had the honor of interviewing when I was a sportscaster in Boston in the 90s, and he was involved with the Sport and Society Center at Northeastern University. And it's all about how there are differences between men and women, and men, if they're going to actually make a difference, have to call on other men to change how they think, as opposed to waiting for the women to make that point to the man. And and then of course there's a paradox. The man in history is supposed to be the breadwinner and the strong one, and controls all the capital and all this. And I don't know about you. They've said it. I think the old white man has screwed up this country since we got here in the 17th century. I mean, look what we did to the Native Americans, for crying out loud, when we got here, right? And then, of course, they started to take the land, my real estate investor friends on this call. Okay, so it is. It's time. I really would like to live to see the day where we have female leadership. And I know we almost did. Okay, I know we almost did. And I don't want to get into politics and why and all this stuff, but it is time. It really is time to make changes in our world. And I really hope that at some point we'll see this in my lifetime. But Jamie Pearson, I don't need to tell you how much I love you, okay? Because thank you for coming on. And Sunday, every time you come on, you say something that I remember, which is unto itself, isn't it? Okay. And I really appreciate you taking the time, because I know this was a short kind of turnaround for you. So thank you for that too.
No,
I just want to say it was nice to meet you, Brooke. I've followed you from afar, and Sunday, I've been a fangirl from afar. We've never met, but I mean, what you've accomplished is incredible. And anyway, I'm happy to have shared a screen with you.
Oh, well, thank you. It was great to
You're
meet you.
so
too.
nice, Jamie. God, I mean, love that.
Yes.
Okay. All right. We've got to take a break. We're going to fill up the room again with some other smart, beautiful women, because that's just what we do here. And don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
So for years, we've been doing manufacturing, financial services, medical, and so forth on businesses that stand alone, from doctors' offices to day traders to even small banks. And so when cannabis came along, all of the tools, skills, and miscellaneous that we learned in there, we were able to apply it for them. And for us, it wasn't that big of a problem or a challenge. It worked great. And so they just needed a reporting feature in one software, and luckily that the software company came through for us, came it back, and now it's become the backbone for our offerings, and it's worked out incredibly well.